Welcome in, Bills Mafia. Welcome in, Bills Mafia. It is Bills Squad. Jeremy White, Joe Marino, and Jerry Ostrowski. We're back for our twice-weekly round table, maybe triangular table, whatever. There's three of us right now. We'll have more guests along the way throughout the offseason and into the season. But we're back for another episode, 1 hour, heavy Bills roundtable to talk about all the things we've got to get to. And coming up on the show, we're going to review the offseason in total. Pretty much have reached the end of the offseason at this point. There'll be OTAs and rookie camps, but boom and bust, bankable upgrades, who's the most likely to contribute to the new faces, how it all fits together. There's new reporting on the Tush Push. Mark Maskey of the Washington Post on the language of the rule, because that got tabled, and now we're into May. The next round of owners' meetings, we could see more Tush Push news coming, how that affects the Bills, and much, much more to get to. So happy to have you with us here as we kick things off live on YouTube. And, of course, you could subscribe to the Locked On Bills podcast. This goes right into your Locked On Bills feed, right in the same channel, right in the same podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And we're back to it for another Bills Roundtable. Gentlemen, howdy.
What's up, guys? Obviously, this is going to be an interesting week with Bills rookie camp firing up on the 9th. And I know that a burning question on so many people's minds right now is, what numbers are these guys going to be? I know we have Maxwell Harrison's at 31, TJ Sanders at 98. But, I mean, I'm a big numbers guy. I care about this stuff. And so we saw Keon Coleman last year pick 0. I'm just kind of curious, you know, what number choice among this group is going to catch us by surprise?
How do you like 0? How do you guys like 0?
I think it's a statement number. I think it works for Keon. He came in with a lot of personality, and I thought it was a bold choice. So I liked it for Keon. I wouldn't like it for every player, though.
I tried to get my son to go with 0 for years because his name is Owen Ostrowski. So it's only fitting that he wore the 0, but he never wanted any parts of it. He would, because of just that reason, he felt it put way too much attention on you. He's not an attention guy. He just wants to go play.
Yeah, you have your 0s, your 1s. We are running out of numbers, it seems. So we'll get new guy numbers.
Well, Matthew Golden picked 22. I mean, that's going to be a tough scene for him. I mean, only Rashid Shaheed is the only guy with 22 that I think has done anything at receiver in the league. So we'll see if there's going to be one of those choices this week.
Do you subscribe to the idea that Christian Benford doesn't get enough love because he wears number 47?
Maybe so, but Rasul Douglas was on a podcast with Richard Sherman, actually, during the season, and he talked about that, and it's all part of, like, Christian Benford's story, where, like, he embraces it. Like, he knows that, hey, if you're a number in the 40s and you're a corner, like, people don't think much of you, and I think that's part of, like, just his own, like, personal motivation for how he plays the game. So whatever's working for Christian Benford, man, don't change the thing, because you're on one heck of a path.
Yeah,
for sure, man. That's numbers are important. I got 60 when I showed up because that's what they gave me, and I was happy to have a number. Believe me, it could have been anything. As long as I had one, that was fine.
We've got a bunch of new faces, bunch of new Bills. We zoom out and look at the offseason as a whole. What they did in free agency kind of mirrors what they did in the draft, which is a heavy focus on their front four and new faces and new places. So if you're giving out an off-season grade, you can go pluses and minuses, A, B, C, D, whatever you want. What grade do you come in at?
I think I come in actually like an A- for the Bills off-season. And in preparation for having this conversation with you guys today, I asked myself 2 questions. I said, where is this team better and where is it worse? And I think you can look at 3 major things that I think are better today. Significantly better today than they were at the end of last season. And one of those would be the defensive line. I mean, obviously, you'd like to think with all these draft picks, with all these free agent dollars spent for the defensive line, that this collection is better. And I don't think you lost much. Your most meaningful subtraction with the D-line is Von Miller, who was kind of a specialized player that had his moments. But at the end of the day, I don't think the impact was quite what we wanted it to be. And unfortunate with the injury. But what did you really lose? Quentin Jefferson, Jordan Phillips, those aren't losses that anyone's concerned about. And I think you've certainly elevated the ceiling with what you've done in the draft and free agency. I think your secondary is better. Kind of swapping out Rasul Douglas and Kyer Elam for Maxwell Harrison, your first round pick, plus a couple of guys that have know-how on this team, and Trey White and Dane Jackson, not to mention like Derek Forrest as a potential upgrade for the depth of the safety room as well that I really like. So you basically return the safety room, plus you have Derek Forrest, so I think has a lot of ceiling, and I think he's a little bit slept on in this free agent class. And then I think your receiver group, you've added speed and route running in a significant way in Elijah Moore and Josh Palmer. So I think those are the 3 areas that I look at and say, you know what? I think this team got a lot better. When I ask myself the question, where did it get worse? Crickets? Maybe punter? I mean, probably Sam Martin's probably better than what the Bills have at punter, but I'm not sure that I look anywhere on this roster and think to myself, you know what? I don't think they're as good in that spot. If anything, it's the same, but it's the same with young players that are on a upward path that you feel like maybe it's not a different group of people, but there's young players that should be better. And you like to think that that position group can be better than it was last year. So I'm very encouraged with where this offseason landed and how this team improved. And ultimately as well, where they didn't get worse.
You know, I would have given it an A. I gave it an A-, and part of me wanted to then move that after a few weeks into maybe the B+ category, and here's why. The A- was because our marquee signee, our marquee guy, Joey Bosa, does have the injury issues, okay? So if Bosa's coming in without the injury issues, I say solid A. The reason I kind of wanted to maybe bump it to a B+ is then you add the 6-week suspensions of Larry Ogunjobi and then Michael Hoyt, right? So now you don't have them for 6 weeks. So, you know, you can kind of look at this thing and mold it however you want. One of the things that I love about what Bean has done lately is he has really done a good job to me of finding veterans that can help the football team at cost-effective contracts. You talked about the safety room. I think that is an area that was solidified there. Then you look at wide receiver and some of the guys he's brought in, you know, on the 1-year deals and things like that. So I think that is where my favorite part of this draft is. Now, obviously, I thought he hit the draft out of the park. I mean, some of these guys he's got on defense, he addresses corner, he addresses defensive tackle and pass rush, defensive end, effort guys, penetrator type guys. The secondary is completely revamped and better. So, yes, I mean, those areas are awesome. But I just look at this thing and I'm like, okay, everybody's super excited about Joey Bosa, but yet in the back of their minds, they're hesitant because of the injuries. And then you got the 6-week suspensions of 2 guys that you know are going to be integral parts in the rotational piece. And as Joe talked about last week, possibly Michael Hoyt being that kind of linchpin between the 4-2-5 and then maybe your heavier defensive packages to play against run-heavy teams like Baltimore, not having them around for 6 weeks, that makes me a little bit iffy. But, you know, everybody understands and everybody looks at this team over the last so many years. We haven't – the regular season hasn't been the issue, right? And we're going to talk about this in a little bit. It's been those last couple drives of the season, and that's kind of where I think we're building to.
Yeah. For me, it's between A-, B+, and the only thing about it is, if I could borrow something that people say in the draft, you know, in the draft, there's only 15 first-round grades, even though there are 32 first-round picks. I almost kind of want to apply that to off seasons, where I don't know how many A off seasons there were in the NFL. There was not a lot of big player movement. Last year, it's Saquon Barkley moves and Derrick Henry moves. And in years past, we've had trades of Devontae Adams in his prime. And, you know, we entered this offseason, I think, a lot of Bills fans thinking about, is there a blue chip idea? Can something get done? Myles Garrett didn't move. Trey Hendrickson still didn't move. Max Crosby didn't move. And on we go with ultimately moves that might have been, you know, the biggest possible swing they could make, but they didn't really move. So it kind of gets to the Bills did a really nice job with what they had available to them in the free agent market. Maybe you wanted them to stay away from the big money contract to Milton Williams or whatever. So I don't think that they made any sort of commitments that could be potential landmines if they don't work out. And that's a positive. And in reality, no one in the AFC, I don't think, really had monster moves. I'm seeing the Patriots given an A on the offseason, but they had a lot of work to do. It's really hard to get that finishing piece when you're a team like the Bills that doesn't have that many spots to fill.
Well, Jeremy, I think I'm surprised that none of us actually brought this up in talking about the offseasons, but it was really a story of extensions for the Bills, right? Josh Allen with the monster extension, Khalil Shakir, Terrell Bernard, Christian Benford, like guys, Greg Rousseau, all these guys got extensions, and I think most people would agree that they came in a little bit under than what the market value was saying that they would be. I think that's another part of this offseason where that should get you excited, like the player retention. A lot of good young players that are part of this nucleus. But I think ultimately those contracts need to age well. And when you go back to some of the contracts that the Bills have extended and we felt good about at the time, some of these guys just got injured. And all of a sudden you're sitting there with huge cap commitments to guys that aren't helping your football team because they're hurt. And so I think that's a big layer to this conversation. These contracts need to age very well across the board.
I think your monster moves in football this offseason were in the coaching realm. It's in the head coaches. So you look at Ben Johnson going to Chicago. You look at Aaron Glenn going to the Jets, Vrabel going to New England. Obviously, to me, this season was much more about the moves in the front offices and head coaching positions as it was players.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where I felt like the Bills missed out. There's not a trade that they didn't make. For a minute, maybe we talked about Devontae Adams, but not really, right? He ends up going to the Rams, and Deebo Samuel got traded to Washington, and I didn't feel like anybody felt like they missed out there. Josh Sweat, I think, Joe, he was a guy you might have targeted and thought in free agency that could make sense, but they decided to go more the draft route. And when you couple what they did in free agency, which was carefully selecting supplemental pieces with extensions and draft picks, what you have is the opposite of last offseason. Last offseason was about a lot of goodbyes, and this is about kind of a longer runway for this version of the Bills with Josh Allen at the helm. You've got a lot of people here now that are here for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I think that they've done a good job of retooling this nucleus and adding depth and feeling like there's a lot of sustainability left in the tank here, right? The Bills have been on one heck of a run here with sustained success on top of the division, winning playoff games, right? They've won a playoff game in each of the last 5 years. The Chiefs are the only team in the league that can say they can do that. And so how do you continue to keep this window open? Of course, Josh Allen exists, and that matters a lot in that conversation. I think he showed last year with a team that was in transition what he's capable of, carrying a team to the AFC Championship game and really being a drive away from going to the Super Bowl. And now this is no longer like the transitional roster where there is now they added to the transitional roster. And so I'm pretty intrigued with kind of the overall direction and the staying power that the Bills continue to find, despite that being an overall difficult formula to crack here in the NFL. Teams don't really have this level of sustained success.
You know, I think you said it all. I mean, it's really hard to keep your own in this league. I think you spend all this time developing talent, and then of course there's huge free agent contracts that lure players away from their teams. I think Brandon Beane's done a great job of keeping his own, and I think that was really, really important. And it's going to be another offseason of that next season. We talked about the center position, we talk about guard, we talk about all those things. And McGovern is going to be up. He's a guy that you want to keep in-house. You got Torrance coming up soon. You want to keep him in-house. So again, it's hard to keep your own, and Beane's done a great job of that. And it's going to be a very high area of importance again next season.
Fair to say that Bills fans should expect them to hit the ground running to some degree. I mean, no coordinator changes, right? That's another thing that was kept the same. Joe Brady returns for another year. He did not leave. And whether it's Dane Jackson, Tre'Davious White, you have your newcomers, but then the offense almost as a whole returns. The defense has a lot of familiar faces. I feel like we should not be thinking about a ramp-up time for this team, which maybe you were thinking that entering last year, given all the departures.
Especially on offense. I actually went back and listened to an episode that I did during the season last year, which I like to do to just kind of see what was the vibe, what was I saying. And one thing that I talked about was the missing production offensively. If you remember earlier in the season, we were talking a lot about third down offense, right? And the Bills were like 25th in third downs, and they were running like 11 less plays per game. And we're wondering, where's the missing production? Well, it's right there. They're not converting third downs. Well, they finished the season towards the top of the league in third downs like they typically do. And I look at something like that as we talk about all the newness on offense that existed last year. That's really not the case this year, whether that's coaching or personnel. I think that being able to hit the ground running is going to matter a ton. And defensively, there's a lot of new pieces here, but you feel like it's upgrades. And I think you're trying to embrace a different type of style where maybe there's some growing pains along the way, but I'd like to think that that's offset by the coaching continuity and as well as personnel upgrades.
I think offensively, it's like you say, hit the ground running. You've got new pieces there, but they're complementary pieces. There's some things that Brady will be able to do. Maybe they couldn't do last year. Elijah Moore coming in. Then you've got, of course, I know we keep going back to him, but it's crazy to think the influence of a late round pick, but Jackson Halls is a guy that can change some things. You can maybe get some different sets there. Where I'm excited is defensively, and it's not just players. I mean, there's speed, there's athleticism, there's twitch all over the place. The thing that excites me about the defense is all these collective minds that have come in the building, these guys from all over the league that have a ton of experience. Now all of a sudden they're there with all these pieces. I think we'll see quite, even though they're not going to trash the 4-2-5, let's not get crazy. But I do think the wrinkles and some of the new stuff they will do is going to be interesting, and I can't wait to see it.
We're going to get to some of those defensive ideas, because we've got to get to boom bust. Who's the biggest potential boom? The safest bet to contribute. Lots to get to when it comes to evaluating the offseason, some of the new faces. It's all coming up here on Bill Squad. Hey, scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more, experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. And with that, Upwork gives business flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. If it's finding the right talent, if you need help with a marketing campaign, Upwork can connect you with a freelance expert who delivers incredible results. Fast and easy hiring, post a job, it's free and simple. And within a day, multiple qualified candidates to choose from. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's Upwork.com. Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business every day. All right, so for the boom bust idea, who's the best candidate for a big boom that people might not be expecting anything from, or potential bust? You know, your swing really for Brandon Beane. We'll do that before we get to the safest bet. So who do you like for the biggest boom bust?
Well, are we capturing that into one thing as a boom or a bust? Because I have a pick for boom and I have a pick for bust.
Okay.
I would say the guy with the biggest boom is Joshua Palmer at wide receiver. I feel like there's not as much excitement as I think there should be with Josh Palmer. And I went into this offseason, I scouted this free agent class and really landed on Josh Palmer as the guy I was hoping the Bills would go after, because I thought he brought a skill set that this team needed. An outside player, right? The Bills have a lot of good slot players, but a guy that can play on the outside, that gave the Bills route running. I thought that was like a missing piece of what the Bills had, particularly on the outside. And that's kind of the calling card with Josh Palmer. And I know that you're not going to look at the production metrics and be blown away, which I would remind everybody that he was like the fourth option on the team behind Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and Austin Eckler. And, then year 3, you lose those top receivers, but then it's a new offensive coordinator. That's a run heavy scheme with Greg Roman. And of course, Ladd McConkey catches lightning in a bottle. And if you watch the tape on Josh Palmer, there's a lot of production left on the field just by throws that were not on target down the field to him. And so I'm excited for Josh Palmer, and I don't know that there's enough excitement. So he's my choice for the guy that I think could be the biggest boom for this free agent class.
My biggest boom is Derek Forrest. At safety. I think that he comes in with a tremendous amount of plays under his belt. I think he's a guy that's a solidified, solid safety in the NFL. And it's not a guy that got run out because of lack of production. It's a guy that got moved out of Washington because of a different idea or scheme. And I think he's a guy that can come in and really, really solidify that safety room. Probably kind of what this staff maybe thought they were going to get out of Mike Edwards last season, right? And now you bring this guy in, and all of a sudden another solid veteran, a guy that could possibly start. I mean, I think he's a guy that could come in and do a lot of really, really good things. So that is my boom guy on this roster. I mean, I think there's a lot of different guys that could qualify for that. I agree with the Palmer thing. I think he's getting, as the kids like to say, slept on a little bit because he's not a huge name. But I really like Derek Forrest, man. I think he has a chance to really solidify that safety room, and probably one of the big reasons why you draft a guy in the 5th round that maybe you can move there as a project as opposed to taking one of your draft choices and trying to go out and find a solid safety. This guy's, I think, going to do a lot of good things in Buffalo.
It's a position that last year, the Mike Edwards situation, I almost want to say, right? He was hurt and never got in time in OTAs, and it got off on the wrong foot and nothing ever happened. So clearly they're hoping that this time around things can go differently, because that one's still just a mystery to me. It's one of these spots where they identify a player very cheap at a position that needed some help, and it just, for whatever reason, never worked out.
Yeah, I think when you look at like the true nature of boom or bust, not just boom, which I think Jerry and I took our own liberties with what Jeremy was asking. I think the answer for like the widest range of outcomes is got to be Joey Bosa on the edge, where, I mean, if he's healthy, we know what this guy's capable of doing in the NFL. And I thought his best game last year was the Houston playoff game. And that's encouraging. You've heard him talk during the offseason about how, by the end of the year, he really kind of felt like himself. And so not only was he playing Joey Bosa type football towards the end of the year, but I feel like he's healthy this offseason, right? So that's going to really help him settle in, acclimate, and hit the ground running. And if it comes together, I mean, that's a guy that was number 3 pick in the draft and can really be an impact player in this defensive line.
Jerry, I think there are a couple things working in Bosa's favor. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this, because a 1-year deal means the Bills have, low risk, high reward. If it works out, maybe things get extended. Maybe they go from there. But the 1-year deal to me means he won't be under a tremendous amount of pressure to play through anything. The Bills are already good. They're in a position where they can really say, hey, listen, operation number 1 is getting you healthy and having you healthy as much as possible. And more than that, as late in the season as possible. I know it's kind of cherry picking, but I'm sure Bills fans would say, hey, if he doesn't even show up until December, I'm not going to worry about it, because that's when he's supposed to be here. It's in high leverage games. And if they can get him right by then, they should be good to go. So, how often is there pressure to play for a guy if you're on a team that's trying to, squeak in by the skin of your teeth?
There's a lot of pressure, but there's a few things I think going in Bosa's favor. Okay. The first thing is this: the Bosa family is football. Okay. The Bosa families, their father played, Nick plays, Joey plays, high level guys. They love the game of football. They played at the Ohio State University. They are about football. And Bosa has gone from San Diego, which obviously did not care enough about their football team to do anything for him. They moved to LA, and they're like about the 4th or 5th franchise in the city of Los Angeles, to now it's the only show in town. Sorry, Sabres, but until you start, playing NHL playoff hockey, it's about the Bills, and it always will be about the Bills. That's going to reinvigorate him more than I think anybody understands. I mean, being in a town where football is important. The second thing is this: Joey's not the only Bosa that's had injury issues. His brother Nick has had lots of injury issues early in his career as well. Nick there's a video out there about, and it's well documented, that he has completely changed the way he trains. He does not train the way he used to. It's a lot of flexibility, more high reps, and those types of things. These are guys that don't have any issues getting big and strong. They have issues staying on the field. I remember Glenn Parker used to always say, he had a ton of sayings, and one of his sayings was, the strongest guy never plays. And it kind of goes towards that. I mean, real big muscular dudes have issues with injuries. They just do. They have a ton of soft tissue injuries, and Bosa is well documented with that. I think that he changes the way he trains a little bit, probably does more of what his brother does, changes the nutritional stuff. He's with a new staff in Buffalo. I expect him to have a monster year. I expect us to be sitting here next season going, dude, how do we afford to keep this guy on the roster? And, like you said, I think there's enough depth now at that position, bringing in Landon Jackson, some of these other guys we have. If Epinesa can step up his game, whatever, Solomon, you've got enough talent there, and you've got enough people to where he doesn't have to play 60, 70 plays a game. He can play 45. That seems to be the nouveau range of defensive tackles, defensive ends. It's 45 plays. If you can get a good solid 45 out of these guys and rotate heavily, you can keep guys healthier and have them fresher as the season goes on. So I think just being in Buffalo is going to change a lot of things for Joey Bosa.
Expectations for him will be tempered, I would say. I think it's fair. We'll see. But just the same, you guys mentioned Michael Hoyt on this idea of like some of their additions. We're talking to the Bills do enough, and that to me, I don't know if he was their first signing. It was early on in the offseason. They identified Michael Hoyt as someone they were going to bring here, because I remember 10 different reports. It's a linebacker, Michael Hoyt. No, nickel back. No, defensive tackle. No, defensive end. And right off the bat, I kind of like the idea just because of that versatility. That screams to me that they've got ideas. They're going to get in the lab with this defense and with this front four. So when they ultimately roll out here, how big of an impact do you think Michael Hoyt can make? Would you put him on the list of most likely to contribute of their offseason additions?
I remember after Lorenzo Alexander stopped playing, we had a couple of off seasons where we talked about, can this guy be the next Lorenzo Alexander? And then it kept not happening. And you realize, well, maybe Lorenzo Alexander is just a very unique player that you don't really replicate the role. If you have a player like that, then you deploy him in that type of way. And well, I think it's finally happened. I think there's a player here in Michael Hoyt that can do a lot of the things that Lorenzo Alexander brought to the Bills, which is rushing off the edge, playing some stack linebacker. And even when they went 3 linebackers, there were times where Lorenzo Alexander could play on the field as a strong side player. In fact, I'm not sure if you guys caught the Bills embedded from the most recent one that they played. And it was Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott having a conversation with Thomas Davis at the combine. And they were talking about, like, we could have had Milano, Thomas Davis, and Lorenzo Alexander. Like, we had the jersey printed. Like, you didn't come to us. So, like, I think there is a vision for how they can deploy 3 linebackers. I'm just not sure that they've had the type of player that makes sense for them to lean into that type of personnel grouping. And so I think we're all hungry for some scheme evolution from the Bills. I think a player like Michael Hoyt gives you some confidence and inspiration that it's coming, because that is the type of skill set that you didn't sign Michael Hoyt to a 3-year deal for him to just come in and do the same things that you asked AJ Epinesa to do. And so I'm excited to see how this comes together. It'll be a little bit later than we want after the 6-game suspension, but if you're hoping for scheme evolution, I think Michael Hoyt's a nice player to point to.
I think the thing that I look at is, while I'm confident in Michael Hoyt and what he can do in that kind of a hybrid role, who else on the roster can do that? Obviously he's not in the first 6 games. If he does come back and we're doing those things, he has an injury. Is there somebody on this roster that can help back him up and help with that role? And I think you probably, for me anyway, the easiest person to look at would be a Javon Solomon. Can Javon Solomon play that role? If they go ahead and they deploy some sort of defense to where there's kind of a defensive end that's also a hybrid outside linebacker that can do some things, maybe carry a route for a little while upfield before your safeties take it over, things like that. Is there another player on this roster? I look at Solomon. I think Solomon's a guy that has a ton of versatility. And being at Troy, I mean, he didn't have to do anything. It was line up and beat tackles that aren't as athletic as he was. That's basically what he did. At that level, you've got a lot of waist. You got a lot of waist benders as opposed to hip benders. He beat them with speed and athleticism. Can he then go ahead and morph into that position? I think he can. Like I said earlier, I'm excited about this defense. I think there's tons and tons of pieces now that weren't there 2 weeks ago. And all of a sudden they have some, they got a little bit of chameleon to them. They don't have to sit in the 4-2-5 all the time. They've got enough pieces to where they can morph into different looks. And I think that's going to help in the long run.
Piecing it all together, the Bills offseason, did they do enough? It is tough to know. Is there, just real quick before our break here, is there a team that is in their direct neighborhood? Kansas City, Baltimore, do I want to say Houston? Do I want to say, you guys pick the teams in the neighborhood of the Bills, contenders that you had an offseason that really you come away with impressed with? Here we are. Feels like the Bills did what they're supposed to, by the book, where they had their needs. Is there a team out there that you watched their offseason and either thought they nailed it or maybe they got away from what they're supposed to?
I'd point to Baltimore as a team that I thought did a nice job this offseason. And I think they were a team that was like Buffalo last year, where they transitioned a lot of their roster and then still came out and had a terrific season. And I think Baltimore is a team that really didn't lose much this offseason. Maybe Patrick McCarry, their most significant subtraction on their offensive line, but they've certainly had some players waiting in the wing ready to kind of take over that spot. So they add DeAndre Hopkins. I don't think much of DeAndre Hopkins, but I think he's a bigger body guy that will play well within the structure of this offense. So I look at them, and they add Malachi Starks in the draft. They add Mike Green in the draft, which is a nice infusion of young talent for their defense. And so I think for Baltimore, you're not going to look at it and say splash, but they also didn't lose much, and they added some subtle pieces here for a team that was already really, really good. Now, I think you're not going to look at Baltimore and get concerned about personnel, right? They have good players. It's about how do they not get in their own way in the postseason, which has been kind of the issue there. But I think this Baltimore team is as much equipped as I've thought they've been in a long time, especially because they really didn't lose much. They just really kind of built subtly throughout this offseason.
I hate to be redundant, but that's exactly what I would say is Baltimore. I mean, nobody understands their identity in the NFL more than the Baltimore Ravens. They have been running players through this program like this since I played against them. They are a heavy run team. They play downhill, tough, hammer you, physical type defense. And honestly, on offense, you got Derrick Henry and all those pieces. You talk about adding Hopkins, but let's face facts. I mean, they've got one of the most dynamic playmakers in the history of the game at quarterback, and just his feet alone can get you out of games. So, no, I agree with Joe, and I hate, like I said, I hate to not be able to come on here and give you some flashy, hidden team that did all these things, but I just look at Baltimore, and Ozzie Newsome's not there anymore, but they continue to do Ozzie Newsome type things, and it's crazy. But yeah, I think Baltimore has retooled, reloaded, and they're set to make another good run.
I saw their GM in an interview in the last couple of days where he laid out the methodology behind really not trading up and always trading down and always having as many picks as possible. He flat out said, like, no one knows the draft, and if you think you should trade up, you probably shouldn't. More often than not, those guys will fall to you. Just, the methodology that Baltimore has, a little different than some of the other teams. All right, when we get back, I want to get the latest on the Tush Push because that was tabled at the last owners' meetings. Sean McDermott became one of the flag bearers for banning the Tush Push. I want to get your thoughts on it, guys, and get you the latest on how the language of the proposal will be basically what determines whether or not this thing moves forward. It's coming up next on Bill Squad. All right, unpopular opinion, possibly. I am in favor of banning the Tush Push. I don't know. Is that okay? Save space here with you two. I mean, the latest is from Mark Maskey of the Washington Post that they may go so far as to banning all pushing on the field anywhere. That I don't want to do, but it seems like the NFL, in an effort to get cut and dry rules, that might be what Green Bay's proposal ultimately is. So, thoughts on it first, specifically the play. We'll get to the Bills. We'll get to all over the field. But where do you guys come down on the Tush Push? Because in the next 2 weeks, we're about to get right back into that whole conversation. And I wonder if Sean McDermott's going to be right front and center again.
I would have to say this, Jeremy. It is a safe space. We all have our opinions, but we have watched the systematic wussification of the NFL over the last 10 years, and this is just right in line with another one of those moves. First and foremost, I am never for more rules for the officials to try to decipher because they can't decipher the ones they have as it is. The human mind, the game has become too fast. The rules have become too vast, and I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but I'm impressed that I did that. And it's one of those things where they just the human mind cannot possibly, at the speeds that are going on, decipher all these things. So first of all, anything where the officials have to make more decisions, I'm against. Second is, and I digress a little bit. There is a documentary on Netflix that I would like everyone to watch if they get a chance. It's called Six Nations. Okay, Six Nations is the oldest rugby tournament in the world. It is Ireland, Wales, England. It is Italy. It is all these teams that play rugby against one another. It's a round robin tournament. At the end, they go ahead and they name the champion of this league. the tush push is about 38th on the list of physical things that you see in the sport of rugby. Okay. And those cats don't have pads on. I am so against this. The problem is it's just like always. Something happens, somebody figures something out in the NFL and teams can't stop it. So instead of going ahead and trying to figure out how to stop it, we'll legislate it. And that's what teams are trying to do. You know, they don't want to do it. Green Bay probably doesn't want to get Jordan Love hurt or whatever. You know what? If you can't run it, you can't run it. But it's a very vital piece of football. It's something that I think is great. If you want to get better at it, then draft players that do, can do the tush push. But to get rid of it to me is ridiculous. And personally, I love aiding the runner as well. There's nothing better than a running back getting stood up on the 3-yard line and seeing Deion Dawkins run 15 yards and just Payaka the pile and push that whole thing into the end zone. That's football. It's physical. It's the way it's supposed to be. And it's not – the other thing to me is it's not a high-velocity play. You're not running from 10, 15, 20 yards. You're 6 inches from one another. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's kind of ridiculous, but then again, it's right in line with the league and what they do.
I think I'm going to side mostly with Jerry on this. I wish there was two bigger sample sizes of data. One being that it's actually not safe. I wish there was actually injury data that said this play is less safe than other plays. But then I wish there was also other teams besides the Bills and Eagles that were doing this at a high rate with a lot of success. And so it feels very targeted. That those would be, not a lot of teams doing this. So if it was so easy to replicate, why are more teams not doing this? But one thing that I am sensitive to is the player safety component of this. And we've heard both Jason Kelce and Connor McGovern talk about it. And they're not like super excited about it's definitely, there's definitely some grimy components to the play. But Jerry, I mean, you've played center in the NFL. You've ran QB sneaks. Like, what do you think about what's required of the players on the play, and is it actually not safe?
I want to address one thing first, and that's the player safety part of this. And the NFL likes to use that as a crutch to me. If you're worried about player safety, you shouldn't be playing on Thursday night after a Sunday game. You shouldn't be talking about playing 18 to 20 games eventually in the league, all these different things. So to me, the player safety part of the tush push is a tad bit overstated because of all the other things the league does to me that are 9 million times worse for player safety than a modified quarterback sneak. Now, granted, I do agree. It's tough on a center. I mean, it's tough on guards. You're getting down low and you're leading with your head without leading with your hands. So there is that aspect. There are some parts of it that aren't great, but any quarterback sneak that you run is the same thing. So, you're looking at basically running a quarterback sneak. You're just taking away the pushing aspect of the sneak. So to me, the basics and the fundamentals of the play will stay the same, whether you run a sneak or you run a push. You're just not pushing the player as opposed to, trying to get it on your own.
I think that's where we get into how the NFL works, because this is a rules proposal. And I think when they voted on it back at the last round of owners meetings, it was 50-50. They need 8 more votes. So they go back. It's like Congress writing a law. You got to write it the right way to get the votes. I don't want pushing all over the field ban, which is the latest proposal from the Packers. And who knows if that gets done. I don't think the player safety idea, I know McDermott kind of championed that. I don't think that holds up. Like you said, Joe, whether it's sample size or people not believing it, the anecdotal stories from, Kelce and Connor McGovern, they matter to me. But for McDermott to say it's about player safety and then they throw Josh in there all the time, I feel like that doesn't really resonate. I support just going back to the old sneaks. For a long time, the regular quarterback sneak was there. It was illegal to push a player from behind, and that kind of grandfathered out or whatever, sunsetted on that rule, and the Eagles and everybody started doing this again. So, is there a perfect language? Is there a way to do it? Because, I like quarterback sneaks. I think those are fine. I think that's still line versus line. It's when I've got Dalton Kincaid pushing Josh Allen, and trying to get one extra yard. And one other thing I'll say about this, guys, and I'll be interested to hear your thought on it. I also think it makes it harder to measure. And I think it drew attention to the fact that Josh, did he get that first down against Kansas City? I don't know, because so many bodies are there. It's harder to spot the ball in that kind of scenario. So it's almost like it's a high-profile play that adds uncertainty in spots when the spots are close. I've got player safety. It just feels like the league wants it gone, and they can't quite figure out how they want to do it.
I think that the league wants it gone because you're possibly hurting marquee players. They feel that their quarterbacks are going to get hurt, and if the quarterbacks are hurt, they're not playing. Anything the league is about marketing. It's about eventually the ultimate, which is making money. So, you know, you can say what you will. I just don't get into all that stuff. I have a hard time. Again, like I said earlier, I have a hard time when the number one thing that is being argued about this play is players' safety, yet we will play Thursday night football. We're talking about 18 games. We're talking about, you know, eventually maybe going to 20 games. To me, it falls on deaf ears when we still do all those things. So if you want to really worry about player safety, get rid of Thursday night. And while it's fun, you know, yeah, it's great. We got a Thursday night football game. You shouldn't be playing NFL games within 4 to 5 days of one another. It's just not the way it should be, but that's what we do. So I don't know. I would have to think that McDermott probably doesn't like it because, again, it puts his guy in harm's way. And when we're talking about the guy that's worth 18 to 25% of your salary cap being in harm's way, that's a big deal. But again, think about this. If you get rid of pushing, how does that change anything? When you're going to run a sneak, you're still going to be 6 inches off the ground. You're still going to be trying to take a defensive lineman's legs out from under him. All those things are not changing. Mm-hmm. The only thing changing is the guy pushing the quarterback. So, you know, that's another thing that I want to, you know, that doesn't change how an offensive line blocks. It just changed what they're doing to the quarterback. How is that? So if you want to really keep everybody safe and you're worried about your linemen, get rid of quarterback sneaks in general. Get rid of everything, not just the push.
I think it's a really good call out by you, Jerry. And whenever Sean McDermott is asked about specifically the safety component of the play, he talks about the optics, right? It's not like he has any data that support that it's not a safe play. It's the optics. And I think what you said there, Jerry, was enlightening to me, because the only thing that would be different is we're no longer going to push the quarterback, right, you know, into the defense, because all the other blocking components would be exactly the same. And so when you isolate it to that, you know, like if you're running a quarterback sneak on your own, you know, you're picking that spot, you're, you know, taking the force that you generate to move forward. Now with the tush push, you have somebody that's pushing you and enhancing, right? I'm not going to get into like science, but what force times acceleration equals something, right? I'm not getting into it, but you know what I'm saying? Like that, there is a piece of that where that would be the optics, I guess, that makes it unsafe. So what this really comes down to is we don't want to smash our quarterbacks into the defense harder than they want to smash themselves against the defense.
Right, exactly. I think that's completely what this is about. It's about your marquee guy taking too much abuse. And I've said this for a million years. Because let's face facts, guys. Ain't nobody give a damn about an offensive lineman. Don't tell me anybody's making this rule because of the O-line. It has nothing to do with the O-line. It has everything to do with the quarterback. And I said this forever. I mean, I would not doubt if maybe I won't see it by the time that I'm 6 feet under, but at some point in time, football is going to ban the 3-point stance. And they're going to go to 2-point stances on offense and 2-point stances on defense. And then we won't be leading with our heads and all those different things. You know, that to me is something that'll eventually happen. But no, let's not get crazy. They don't want to ban this because they're worried about Jason Kelce. They want to ban this because they're worried about Jalen Hurts. They want to ban it because they're worried about Josh Allen. And then the other guys that are jumping on board, they want to ban it because, hell, they can't stop it. So if we can't stop it, we'll legislate it out of the game. But no, it does not change anything for the offensive line, whether there's a push or not a push.
Mark Maskey, Washington Post, the one to report that the way that it would read, it would a revised proposal prohibit a teammate from pushing or pulling a ball carrier anywhere on the field. So all of a sudden that becomes, again, that's what they're going to discuss. That becomes more than just quarterback sneaks. Now we're talking about that play 5 yards down the field where, you pile into James Cook and there's Osiris Torrance blasting him down. And, those plays, Jerry, to your point about, the league's not out to protect offensive linemen. Those are like the glory plays for offensive linemen and the run game and stuff like that. That's when the stadium gets the loudest for the offensive line and the efforts of an offensive line is like, hey, you blocked it up well, and then you went and then you smashed them for 10 more yards. Like that's the moment.
No, exactly. I mean, that's what you play for. That's your job, right? Not many positions in any sport where you line up and your back is to all the action, right? Your back is to where the football is. Your back is behind everything that's going on. O-linemen lead from the front, man. It's a servant leadership position for sure. And if you don't know what servant leadership means, look it up. It's the epitome of what great offensive line play is all about.
Bill's squad here, Jeremy White, Joe Marino, Jerry Ostrowski. A comment/mailbag segment to wrap up. We've been talking about doing this. So if you're on the feed of this live, throw in a comment, throw in a question. If you want to have us answer, have us kick it around as a topic. I've already started a couple, so we'll get to those. So if you're there, drop a question. We'll get to that next, coming up on Bill's Squad. All right, time for the mailbag, the comment bag to finish up this edition of Bill Squad. Jeremy White, Joe Marino, Jerry Ostrowski. Of course, you can watch us on YouTube on Mondays and Thursdays. You can download the podcast in podcast form wherever you get your podcasts, right there on the Locked On Bills channel. So we'll get some of the comments, some of the questions we got along the way. And if you want to add some in, we'll get to them. Chris writes in, is there pressure on Bobby Babich to have a big turnaround with all the investments this offseason in the defense? I like this question because the defense has a high standard. And last year, Babich's first year as a defensive coordinator, it did not quite meet that standard. That tends to go to Sean McDermott, maybe to some roster stuff. But how much pressure is there on Babich, if there is?
I think there is and should be some pressure on Bobby Babich, who's been an understudy of Sean McDermott for a number of years, groomed for the job, and he gets the job, and then the defense was the problem. Not good enough on third down, not good enough against the pass, not good enough rushing the passer. And they, of course, had a very deliberate offseason to get the talent right for them to run the scheme. And I think he does get some level of grace for year one because of all the transitional elements and it being his first year as the defensive coordinator. But I think we need to see significant growth from this unit. And I do think that there is pressure and should be pressure on Bobby Babich.
I think obviously there's pressure on Babich to try to get this thing turned around. But I will say this, I think that we all know that Bobby Babich is doing exactly what Sean McDermott wants him to do. He is running McDermott's defense. That's why I think it's been so interesting to see the infusion of defensive coaching talent brought in this offseason, because with that, to me, it is a telltale sign that's like, hey, I've kind of maybe maxed out what I can do, me being McDermott, as far as how I like to play defense and those things. This league is evolving. I need some outside help to bring in some fresh ideas. So I think that while the 4-2-5 will be the main staple of this defense, I think it should, people should pay attention of the people that were brought into the building. I think that is a sign that they understand they need to do some things differently, because, obviously we're talking about the same ending over and over again for this Bills team in the playoffs. So you've got to bring that those fresh views, fresh ideas, fresh set of eyes in the building to help get some of that stuff. So I think this will be an interesting offseason. It's going to be a collective. I think you're going to have a lot of voices in a room. Now, ultimately, Babich will be the end all, or McDermott will be the end all, but there's going to be, quite a bit of new stuff brought in to help this group, not just player wise, but also schematic wise as well.
How do you separate if you can? I mean, Leslie Frazier and Sean McDermott worked together for quite a long time. There were times McDermott's calling the plays. There's times when Frazier's calling the plays. And for Babich here, the Bills coaching tree, we've seen the offensive side go with Brian Daboll leaving, and maybe Joe Brady is the next one to do it. So how can a typical Bills fan, if you're kind of watching year over year, not make it Sean McDermott's defense? Instead, it's Bobby Babbage that's calling the plays, or is it just one and the same? Like you should really look at it like it's Sean McDermott's defense, because I get the impression that's what most ultimately do.
I feel like there were tangible differences in the defense in the really 3 different iterations, when Frazier called it, when McDermott called it for 1 year, and when Babbage called it last year, where I thought Sean, when he was the coordinator in 23, like the third down stuff, he was very aggressive. Even at times I didn't think he should be, with a lot of blitz, a lot of man coverage on long and late downs. And you kind of just had some matchup problems where your safeties couldn't run with guys. And I felt like that was kind of problematic. He ran a lot of stunt game. He involved the D line a lot more with twists and stunts up front, where I thought with Frazier, I thought it was a lot more playing with vision, like zone match, playing with more depth, read, react, less pressure looks. And then I thought Bobby Babbage was maybe a little bit of a hybrid of both of those ideologies. So I do think ultimately it is Sean McDermott's defense, but it certainly felt like it was called different under Frazier the 1 year with McDermott, and then even how it was called this year under Babbage.
But the one thing I think you can look at all 3 and you can agree on this, the fact that it is a defense run on analytics, it is a defense run on probabilities, and it is a defense run to keep everybody in front of them, not give up the big play, and then make the big play. So however you want to look at it, and the differences that are there, obviously they're there, but this is a highly analytical defense that plays probabilities, quite a bit.
Another question coming in from Steve. Do you trade both an offensive and defensive lineman before cutdown day? This can kind of get to your Locked On Bills episode, Joe, about the roster and the roster makeup. We've seen them do a defensive end trade in the preseason before, right? Daryl Johnson, when they had too many, and they certainly have a number of bodies, especially on that front seven. The suspensions might change that, but do they have an overflow where you could see something by the time they get to cutdown day?
Well, injuries will obviously shape this up, but if you live in a world where everyone is healthy, I think that you have one defensive lineman that makes sense to trade. That would be AJ Epinesa. Actually, there's no other way to get out of that contract right now other than trading him, and you'd free up actually $6.2 million in cap space only if you trade AJ Epinesa. You got a little bit of dead cap this year, I think around $1 million, and maybe around $2 million in 2026. But that'd be a pretty practical way out of that deal. I don't think you'd get much because your win would be the cap space. But if you wanted to make a move D-line wise, I think you'd look there. For offensive line, obviously the Bills have a lot of intriguing young players. And in my roster projection this morning, I didn't have Chase Lunt making the team, right, as a drafted offensive lineman, which is pretty typical, whether it's been Luke Tenuta, Jack Anderson, Nick Broker. The Bills have drafted guys late on day 3 that didn't make the roster. And I think Lunt could be the next one, especially because your 9 offensive linemen from last year that you rostered are all back, your 5 starters and your 4 primary reserves. And so I think it's a tough lineup to crack if you are unable to have an injury, which you hope is the case. And so could they move one of those depth players? Could they move Lunt? I think it's possible, but I think ultimately they'd love to just try to sneak him onto the practice squad. So I think there's pathways for it to happen, but I'm not holding my breath.
No, I agree. I think if you look at the defensive lineman, the guy that makes the most sense would be Epinesa as far as possibly moving him. Earlier we had the segment about boom or bust. I don't want to say bust, but the guy that I'm worried about anyway of being, maybe the term would be lost as opposed to bust, would be Ogunjobi. I mean, we've got all these guys now inside. You're not going to give up on a dude like Dwayne Carter, who you drafted in the 3rd round the year before. So they're going to do everything they can to get him on the field. You pick 2 defensive tackles in your first 4 rounds. Now, all of a sudden, the guy that's been out for 6 weeks, how does he fit back into the rotation in the mix, especially if the guys that you brought in are performing at a level you want them to perform at? So I think that's where, you look at that and say, maybe not bust, but lost as far as how do you get back into rotation after being out 6 weeks. Offensive line wise, I don't see trading any of those guys. I agree. They've got a bunch of young developmental talent. The guys they picked last year seem to be highly viable, with Edwards possibly moving on, which he probably will. The uncertainty of McGovern and the uncertainty of Torrance, the last thing you want to do is move any developmental pieces. So I don't think you move any of those guys. You keep them around and you try to do everything you can, whether it's, Lunt's got turf toe. I don't know, make something up,
Sure.
but figure out a way to keep him around and on the practice squad, because I do think he has a skill set that fits what Aaron Kromer wants out of his inside guys. So, I don't see anybody moving there. And I guess the only guy that I would consider trading, and if he could do it, it'd be awesome, would be AJ Epinesa.
I would love to ask Jerry a question here. You're uniquely qualified to answer this. And this is kind of surprising, and it leans into this overall conversation we've had about the offseason and continuity on offense. And one thing that's pretty surprising is that this is going to be the first year under McDermott that the Bills' starting 5 offensive linemen return year over year. And maybe that's not a big enough conversation for us in kind of getting ready for the season and talking about the offseason, is that they were able to retain everybody for their offensive line. I think we just know generally that continuity matters. Continuity on the offensive line is a good thing. But as a guy that's done that, over 100 starts for the Buffalo Bills, how much does that matter year over year that the Bills are in a position right now to have their exact same starting 5 offensive linemen year over year?
I think it's immense. I don't think anybody understands just how important it is, because when you have a bunch of guys playing together for this long, and here's the other cool thing about the Bills line, even though I guess you would say Dion is the elder statesman of the group, this is a relatively young offensive line that could, if Bean gets these contracts done, could play together for quite some time. Of course, we can't predict injury and all those things, but I don't think people understand the importance, because there are just so many nonverbal things that you do when you play together in a unit like that for a long, long time. Calls don't need to be made. You understand on this play where the body position of the guy next to you is probably going to be, what they do good, what they do poorly, all of those different things. So when you can play up front with 5 guys and the communication is minimal and everything is understood, it's kind of that magical moment where you do get that 5 guys working as one. And it's exciting. And that's why, to me anyway, I'm so nervous about this offseason. I know that, you're like, nervous. Hell, we haven't even gotten there yet. We don't even know what's going to happen in the season, but I do not want to see any of these guys leave, because this is a special group. And if they can keep them together, it would be unreal.
The live mailbag going well. We'll do one more. Time for one more. Adam writes in, are we going to see more down the field shots with Moore and Palmer and another year of Brady to work them in? Feel like it's the only thing the offense is missing. Guys, I don't think you'd have too many to dispute that it's the thing the offense has seemingly missed, the vertical shot. The question is, what is the root cause of missing it? Could it be not having a vertical receiver? Could it be, Joe, I know you've charted, the quarterback has not been particularly sharp in this department. He's incredible, but by his standard, this is something that he could stand to be a part of getting better at.
Yeah, well, the vertical passing offense is something that the Bills certainly tried to do last year. Josh Allen was 5th in percentage of attempts that were 20 yards or more down the field, which is what we talk about as a deep pass, right? That's the 5th highest rate of throws that were deep. Problem is that they just weren't very good at it, right? All of the efficiency metrics, however you want to measure vertical passing offense, the Bills are like bottom 5 in the NFL. I'm hopeful that with these skill sets that offer more verticality, in particular Elijah Moore, that it can be more consistent, and certainly separation will help with vertical passing and more consistency with ball placement. So I think you had a number of factors last year, whether it was Josh Allen's own deep accuracy, lack of vertical receiving talent, continuity, right? Like, you have all those new players. I think probably the hardest part to develop the chemistry with is the down the field stuff. So hopefully that's all a lot better, because I think that is the missing piece of the offense. If they can get more explosive plays in the passing game by throwing the ball down the field, boy, the Bills are going to be even more of a nightmare to match up with.
I think the biggest thing, and it's what Kansas City does so well, is you got to stress 3 levels of the secondary. And I don't think we do that very, very well, because we don't have that deep threat or those guys who can get those 20 plus yard routes run very well. Now I believe we have those types of players. You've got to stress the short game, intermediate, and the deep game all at the same time. And I think Kansas City, like I said, does it so well. And now you got players in Buffalo that you add another layer to that. I think we'll definitely be a 3-level team. And I think that bodes well for us. I think it's something that it makes it covering those things, quite a bit harder. I think that's why you see a lot of intermediate type routes, those crossing routes in Kansas City always come open, because you might be able to take away the short stuff or play the deep stuff, but the underneath stuff is always there. So adding a Palmer, adding a Moore, adding some of these guys, another year of development with Keon, I think you'll have that in Buffalo, which will open up quite a bit of stuff.
One more comment, just because it's funny. Walter wrote in, I want the Tush Push banned for no reason than to never hear Tush Push again. And that's my entire justification. We were calling it the brotherly shove and the snow plow. We got, there should be a name for each one. Each team gets its own name. Bills will be the snow plow,
I like it, but Tush Push is just, everybody knows it as the Tush Push. So you got to, I'd love to not say it. I'd love to not debate whether it's going to exist or not. Like, just make a decision and let's move on with it.
Yeah. Well, we might get that in the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned. I'm sure, future shows, we'll chat about it. All right. That does it for us. Thanks for listening, for writing in, for commenting. That mailbag, I think, went just fine. We can do that in the future, pulling up questions, comments. And if we didn't get to you, we'll get to you in the future. So we're back Thursday and talk then, Bills Mafia. Thanks for tuning in. Go Bills.
Go Bills.
Much love. Go Bills.